So welcome everybody. This is the meeting with the Black Parents Workshop from across the river in New Jersey. I'm not going to say too much about it because we have two gentlemen from the group with us tonight to tell us about what they have done. So I would like to introduce Mr. Walter Fields and Mr. Robert Tarver. Did I have those names right?
You had the names right,
Great.
exactly right, and we're
So
really excited to be with you this evening.
great. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it.
So I think I should start from square one because
Yes.
you have all probably read some of the press coverage around our legal settlement, but I really need to give you some background. So 8 years ago, this story really began when my daughter was a eighth grader in middle school. And in our school district, eighth graders are given an assignment for what their ninth grade math class will be. My daughter was a math whiz. She had an A in mathematics. She scored advanced proficient in mathematics on every statewide assessment from fourth to eighth grade. And when we received the letter, my wife and I, for her ninth grade math placement, the district was going to place her in what was the equivalent of a remedial math course. And we were alarmed because we had heard for a number of years, we had lived in the community for almost 2 decades by that time. And we had heard these rumors that Black students were always tracked into remedial level classes in the district's high school, Columbia High School. And lo and behold, it was happening to my daughter. So after meeting with the middle school principal and meeting with this district math supervisor, I demanded that my daughter be placed in an appropriate level, advanced level math class, which she was. She did fine, then came to 10th grade geometry, and she had a algebra 2 teacher after geometry, ninth grade geometry, who every day discouraged Black students in her class. There were only 6 Black students out of 31 in her advanced algebra 2 class, and every day the teacher was telling the Black students that they should think about dropping down to a lower level class. The other problem was that my daughter was a star athlete in the school, and this teacher had actually said on parents' night that students who are athletes really shouldn't be in her class because she didn't feel as though they could cut it. And so after these episodes, the ACLU reached out to me and the UCLA Civil Rights Project and asked me if I'd be interested in having my daughter serve as a lead complainant in a civil rights complaint against the school district. My wife and I agreed, and we filed that complaint with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. And unbeknownst to us, on the very day that we met with the school district to tell them we were going to file this complaint, the school district told us that they had been under investigation by the Office for Civil Rights over these issues of tracking students and over these issues of racially disparate suspensions and expulsions. But we filed the complaint anyway, and we ended up settling with the school district. But after that incident, after discussing it with my wife, I said, you know, it can't only be our daughter that's experienced this. Like, if it happened to her, it's probably happening to a lot of Black students in the school district. And I met with a couple of other parents, and we decided to form a Black Parents Organization, a Black Parents Workshop. So in 2014, we formed the Black Parents Workshop. We incorporated in the state of New Jersey, and we pretty much notified the school district that, hey, we'd like to work with you to resolve some of these issues that we're seeing. That we know that there's a racial disparity in terms of Black students in all of these advanced level and advanced placement courses, that there's a racial disparity in the number of suspensions and expulsions, and we really want to work with you. Well, we tried to work with the district in everything that we did, including taking the district out of state to show them schools that actually worked, that were committed to equity, bringing in national experts that we introduced them to. Everything that we attempted to do, the school district basically ignored. And at that point, I said, well, I think our only other recourse is going to be litigation. We also had a situation in our school district where our elementary schools were actually segregated. And in New Jersey is the only state in the nation that has a provision in its state constitution that expressly prohibits segregation in public schools. We had that provision starting in 1947. So 7 years before Brown versus Board of Education, the New Jersey state constitution outlawed racial segregation in public schools. So I knew we had a strong legal basis to stand on. And after talking to Mr. Tarver, who's been a friend of mine for a number of years, for decades, we said, okay, we need to file a federal action in U.S. District Court against this school district. And the claims were really basic. They were, look, you're discriminating against Black students, per Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the New Jersey Constitution, and you're discriminating them on the basis of excluding them from advanced level courses and advanced placement courses, the manner in which they are disciplined compared to white students, and the fact that you have segregated elementary schools. And what helped us out tremendously is we had a ton of data. We had data from the US Department of Education, we had data from the ACLU, we had data from the New Jersey Department of Education. So there was really no place to hide for the school district. But what I have found in these cases, and when I'm talking to other school district communities, what I'm finding is that anytime you challenge a school district on these issues, the immediate reaction is to dig their heels in, even if the data is against them. And so we knew we were going to be in for a fight. So in 2018, when we filed this lawsuit, we figured it was going to be a lengthy battle. I didn't assume it was going to be 2 years, but I think what happened, and Mr. Tarver can certainly add to this, through this process of litigation, through discovery, when we came upon a lot of documents, through the depositions that we're taking in this federal lawsuit, myself and the school district superintendent, it became painfully aware to the school district lawyers that they were at risk of millions of dollars of liability because we had such a strong case against this district. And so about 8 weeks ago, the school district attorneys reached out to Mr. Tarver and said, hey, let's try to settle this. And the settlement terms of the lawsuit were precisely the exact terms that we filed on. There were no changes. Nothing changed from what we asked for, what we settled for. And so when you look at the settlement, it's pretty broad-based. We were able to also include in the settlement a monitor for the lawsuit. We have a retired New Jersey Supreme Court Justice, John Wallace Jr., who's only the second African-American to ever serve in the New Jersey Supreme Court. He agreed to be the monitor of the settlement to make sure that the school district would comply. We have things in this settlement agreement, such as the transparency of data. One of the things I will tell you that if you can't get the data, you will never be able to move your school district to a place of equity. Facts matter, data matters. And so as part of this settlement, the school district now has to publish annually course enrollments by race and gender. They have to publish every month statistics on suspensions and expulsions by race and gender for each school. We were also able to achieve the creation of an assistant superintendent's position for equity and access, because we felt as though if there wasn't someone who was specifically responsible for this area, nothing would ever change. We also have things in there around the teaching of Black history. New Jersey has a state law that mandates African-American history, the Amistad Act, passed in 2002, which our school district didn't fully implement. So now the school district has to confirm with our organization through the New Jersey Department of Education that it is in full compliance with the Amistad Black history curriculum in its overall school curriculum. And those are just a few of the things, including desegregating, of course, its elementary schools. But what I would really encourage you as you look at these issues is to make sure you have the data. Try first to negotiate in some way with the school district, and that's hard sometimes. But we've been telling people litigation should never be a first option. You really need to exhaust every other option because litigation can be expensive, it can be tiresome, unless you have someone who is going to stay focused on this litigation. And I'm talking about a lawyer, I'm talking about someone within your organization. It can be a very difficult task. But I think the most important thing is making sure you have a strong case. And the case I've been making with folks across the country is that this is a matter of national economic security, that we cannot allow this generation of children to not receive a first-class quality education. Because as the nation moves to a majority minority population by 2045, according to the US Census, the very children in K through 12 schools today are going to be the adults we're going to have to depend on to make sure that this nation continues as a viable nation. So that in a nutshell is sort of where we started, where we are, and right now we're just really focused on the compliance side of this legal agreement, making sure we have all of our ducks in order so that the school district doesn't have any room to try to back out of any of the provisions or say they can't comply with the provisions. So we're now in the stage of getting ready to hold the district's feet to the fire to make sure they live up to all the commitments they made in this legal agreement. Rob, I don't know if you got something else you want to add in terms of the legal strategy?
No, not really. I think you've covered almost everything. I can say this. What made part of our legal strategy doable was the fact that we engaged in what I like to call strategic advocacy. And that is that the Black Parents Workshop as an organization took the time to create the building blocks that you need in order to move forward. And the way that that was accomplished was that we as an organization basically immersed ourselves into the school operations, that we responded to complaints accurately, timely, that we had a very strong chain that showed the correspondence that we sent to the district on various issues. We demanded answers, and we sought information where we could. We have a strong Open Public Records Act in New Jersey. I think you have the Freedom of Information Law in New York. Those tools can be very, very important toward moving forward. And again, you will need to form some form of, and this is what we've talked about over and over again. You've got to have some form of partnership with a legal advocate, someone who knows the law, someone who has the ability to inform you of what your options are. And quite frankly, someone who acts as a gun in your holster, because an unholstered gun is, or it's nothing. So you have to have some backup with that. Mr. Fields, he took an immeasurable amount of time creating documents that we now have even as a template that served as a stepping stone toward moving to litigation. And as you said, litigation is always a last resort strategy, but it's a losing strategy if you have not set up the building blocks to litigation. So that's all I would add.
And you know, I think when Mr. Tarver talks about sort of the advocacy side of it,
and feel free to call me Rob, everyone.
It was to the point of attending meetings during the day to represent parents and things like meetings around a student's IEP or 504. We would show up at the school and actually represent parents in those meetings. Things like making sure that whenever the district committed to something, we would follow up with correspondence to let them know that we were going to hold them accountable. One of the first things that the district did was they passed an open access policy for students to enroll in any course, because we had a horrible system of tracking in the South Orange Maplewood School District. But when they did that, they sent me the first draft, and I virtually rewrote the entire policy. And in that policy, I embedded certain things that were trap doors. I made sure in that policy there was a provision that enrollment in classes should represent the demographic profile of each school. So if a school had 50% African-American students, then 50% African-American students should be enrolled in advanced level classes. The board didn't even understand why I put that in there, but we put so much pressure on the board that they passed that policy. So when it came time to sue the board, we were able to go back to the policy and say, you didn't live up to anything that you said you were going to do. And the beauty of our lawsuit is that it was based on everything that the school district had committed to do and never did. So we were able to file a federal lawsuit and say, look, it's in this policy, 50463, when you said you would do this and you didn't do it. And here's the data to show that you didn't do it. We really did a very good job of holding this district accountable. And I saw one of the questions pop up about our superintendent's intentional integration plan. Well, the reality is it's not a plan. What we were able to do through our depositions was reveal that the new superintendent, he's only been there, he's been there less than a year. He had a concept around how to integrate our elementary schools, but no specifics. And so when it came time for his deposition, we were able to expose him on that very issue because we asked him, like, specifically, how are you going to integrate the schools? Like, we haven't seen a real plan that shows step by step how you're going to reassign students. Are you going to bus students? Are you going to shut down one elementary school and balance it out with the other 4 elementary schools? He's presented sort of this vision around integration, but now because of this legal agreement, they have hired Dr. Edward Fergus, who is an equity scholar at Temple University. And now Dr. Fergus is actually going to create the real integration plan of how we're going to racially balance these elementary schools. So I think part of what you have to do is you have to be vigilant, because school districts often talk with lofty rhetoric about what they're going to do, but unless you follow up, most of them don't do what they say they're going to do. And around issues of integration and equity, most school districts are on a slippery slope. And I think for a parents organization, you have to commit yourself to staying on top of the school district and being responsive and being very proactive in pushing an agenda that parents can rally around.
The other thing that helped us quite a bit is that we made a decision early on that we were not necessarily going to rely on what we thought was best for remediating the problems of the district, but we went out and got information from some of the best experts in the country. You may not be able to do that, but at some point you will have to basically see the idea of what you're trying to do to people who know more about it than perhaps you do. And I think that's one of the ways that we were able to get some real concessions from the district, because it wasn't what we were asking, it was what our experts were saying, was probably some of the most important things and some of the most doable things. This is not brown water, Mr. Falwell says. This is actually Coca-Cola. But
doesn't matter to me what you drink, Robert. Whatever makes you happy.
It is after 6 on Friday too.
Yes, absolutely.
And the other thing I will add is we decided from the very beginning that we were going to make this a public fight. We often find parents who don't want to get their hands dirty, don't want to be seen as rabble-rousers or troublemakers. And I decided early on, because of my background, I was a former political director for the state NAACP in New Jersey. I was vice president for a major not-for-profit in New York. And I just said, the only way we're going to win this is that we have to make this a public fight and smoke the district out of its comfort zone. And you will find that most people in education circles, they do not want to engage publicly on these issues because it's an embarrassment. Who wants to be seen as supporting segregation or discrimination? Well, we know one person who does, but most people don't want to be held to that standard and be held accountable. So I think what you also have to make sure is that you have a potent communication strategy, because if we go back over 8 years of the press coverage and television coverage of the Black Parents Workshop, we overran the school district with media, and they had no place to hide. And I think that helped us tremendously, because once you get a journalist, and I've been a journalist, who really understands your issue, they then begin to sink in to the issue and really understand it at a level that the school district has no place to hide. One of the best pieces we had done, I don't know if we had a New York Times piece that was done, I guess, last summer. And it was a fabulous piece. And that piece alone really put the school district's backs against the wall. The Washington Post, Jay Matthews, is one of the foremost education writers in the country. He's written 5 articles in the South Orange Maplewood School District. And every time he wrote an article, we saw what the reaction was by the school district. So I think the combination of advocacy, communications, and a legal strategy allows you to level the playing field with school districts and win a fight like this.
So before I open up to questions from the participants in the meeting, I just have a couple clarifying questions. So you started this when your daughter was in 8th grade, you said?
8th grade.
And that was when?
That was 2012.
2012.
And she is now a college graduate, just graduated
Right.
from the University of Pittsburgh.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
But
you.
it's taken 8 years. Okay,
Yes.
so that's the time frame that we would like us to be aware of. And you decided to sue in 2018.
2018.
So you spent 6 years trying to work with the school district before you decided you had to go further.
Absolutely. And, you know, part of our frustration was we were truly earnest in our outreach to the school district. So we took them up to Long Island, to Rockville Center, Long Island.
Carol Burris.
Carol
Yes.
Burris. And
Yeah.
Carol has been one of our biggest allies.
Mhm.
Carol reached out to me when she saw the first Washington Post article about my daughter. And she sent me an email and said, hey, look, bring your school district to my school district. Let them spend a day in Southside High School because I will show you how to do it. And I took the school district up there. We had an incredible day. We came back to New Jersey and nothing happened. You know, I took the school district to Montgomery County, Maryland, to a great high school in Silver Spring, Maryland, and we spent the day there. Nothing happened. I took them to a great school in Jersey City, New Jersey, a middle school. Nothing happened. And then we were supplying them with all of these experts around the country who were trying to tell them, look, you can fix this. Like you don't want to really get into a situation of litigation because as a school district, that's the last thing that you want. You don't want parents to sue you to provide the education that their children are legally entitled to. Like that's a complete failure for a school district, but they wouldn't listen. And so time and again, we were making these efforts to say to the school district, look, let's fix this. Like this is an upper middle class community. Like if any community should be able to fix this, it's the suburban community. But I think they had become so comfortable. And South Orange and Maplewood, unfortunately, experienced a rapid transformation in the 1990s of population, where a large number of African Americans, my wife and I included, moved into that community. And quite honestly, the community wasn't ready for it. And so now you had a high number of Black students in the school district, and a school district that was homogeneous up until that point for the most part. So, you know, I think the years that we took to get to this point aren't necessarily the years that everyone will have to take. I think we had a very unique situation because I think there was some resistance there that just had a lot to do with the changing racial and cultural dynamics of that community and how it happened so quickly. And it caught a lot of people off guard. But I will say this, I think that part of what you have to do is you have to make sure that there are at least some allies within school buildings and the school district. We had a few people at the central office level who always supported us and who made sure that we were aware when things were coming down the pipeline. We had teachers in school buildings who would call me and email me and come over to my house and explain what they saw was happening in the school building, because we developed a lot of trust. Once people saw that we were not going away, because a lot of times groups form and there's a lot of excitement in the beginning, but when they saw us at every board meeting, when they saw us at every special meeting that was being called, teachers began to have a level of comfort with us because they were like, oh, wait a minute, they're really serious about this. So we were able to develop a cadre of allies within the school district that sort of served as our covert operation, and I could always depend upon to get the truth. And I think that's really important.
With that, I want to open up to questions from people in the meeting space. If you could use your raise your hand function, that would, I think, make it easier. So go ahead and, all right, Dr. Cody, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, I didn't think I was going to be first. Hey, you know what? You brothers, and may I refer to you as brothers,
Yes, you
have
can.
given me a lovely exhale for this weekend. I really appreciate you all, and I'm proud of the work that you've done. You've done your homework. A lot of us don't think long term, but what you are doing and establishing has created a long term um, enhancement for all of us and a foundation as well. So on that note, with a different hat, because I have many hats, but a different hat that I wear, I act as an advocate on behalf of so many parents and families across the country. And as you know, there are so many cases, and we're having a Northeast region virtual education speak out on Monday. So I'm going to put the email, and I hope it's okay with Shino and Naquan. I'm going to put the email in the chat. And if you can email me, I want to invite your organization or a member of your organization to participate in that meeting. Now, I'll share more when you share the email, but I just definitely wanted to say you have provided a nice little exhale. Now I can take another deep breath, dive back in, and get to fighting some more. But thank you.
Well, thank you. And certainly we're willing to participate in almost any forum. I was flown out to Colorado last year to speak to a group out there, and now I'm working with them on some state legislation around school discipline. So, these issues that we face in South Orange or Maplewood they're not unique to South Orange or Maplewood. It's all over the country. The problem is that public education is so fragmented that you really have to fight by going district to district. It's very difficult to create sort of a national framework for this, because education really is the purview of states and local communities. And in New Jersey, it's really absurd because we have 600 school districts. So it's really a challenge in a state like New Jersey, where you have all these independent school districts that are fiefdoms. And so a lot of New Jersey school district communities are now talking to us because they're trying to figure out, is there some way that we can create some synergy based upon our legal agreement to tackle this in school districts throughout New Jersey? But I will tell you this: I appreciate the graciousness in your remarks, and I will also tell everyone it's important to have a very helpful, significant other if you're going to take on this fight, because it requires so much time and energy that you really have to have a spouse or a partner who's going to be a partner with you in this fight. Because I can't tell you how many hours I put in with this work, which was volunteer, like no money, where I had to not take on some clients. So like my income dropped. But because my wife was so supportive, we were able to do this. So it has a real profound effect on you personally.
Next question is from Erica Kendall. Go ahead, Erica.
All right, good evening. Just very quickly, piece to that part about having a supportive family, because man, oh man, this stuff will take all kinds of time and energy. I too want to take a moment to kind of just celebrate and lift up the work that you've done. Really, it is remarkable and incredible. And it's a position that I think in New York City that we find ourselves kind of in, but also adjacent to, because one of the things that I'm looking at is in terms of distribution of resources, right? And one of the things that I keep running into is trying to understand really clearly how schools are funded inequitably. And one of the things that I keep running into is the idea of property tax.
Erica, you're breaking up.
Are affected. And if the Black
Erica, you're breaking up. Yeah, try again. Okay, I think her audio is not coming through. While she sorts it out, let's go to Jonathan. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here. I'm somebody who loves to read about history and about other kind of projects and failed and successful plans in school integration. But to hear you talk about this is really powerful. I have a couple of questions. One of them is, well, actually the main question I have is about outreach to the community and what kinds of support or resistance you might have gotten from various segments of the community. Because I know that, you know, when we talk about inequity and we talk about funding, we can pretty much get everybody on board. But there's a lot, but integration is a complex issue. And we know that many Black communities have had traumatic experiences with integration. And I was just wondering what that was like and how much kind of, you know, what over these 8 years, was there an effort to kind of bring people on board? And what role did they play in this movement?
Well, that's a great question, because when we first announced the organization, we had an open public meeting. And we just told everyone, come to this meeting. We're going to talk about creating this new organization. And we got a lot of support immediately. And we made clear to everyone that we were not going to be a quote unquote member organization. Because I have so much experience in organizations, and I also have a professional certificate in not-for-profit management from NYU. So I was very leery of creating a membership organization, because that meant that everyone would think that they had a role in making the key decisions. And I knew that sometimes decisions have to be made quickly and they have to be made strategically. So we pegged ourselves as sort of a public policy advocacy group, that we would represent the interest of Black children in this community. And we got a lot of resistance. We got some resistance from the Black community, quite honestly. You know, we have a middle-class Black community where some communities have experienced white flight. Well, we have Black flight. We have Black middle and upper middle-class parents who have taken their children out of the public school district and placed them in private schools. And so they sort of washed their hands of all the issues in the public school district. You know, we had whites in the community who felt as though we were somehow tarnishing the image of South Orange and Maplewood. These are two communities that have spent decades in building this image of being one of the most progressive communities in the United States. It's been featured in magazines, on television. And so here we come along. We were the first organization in South Orange and Maplewood that actually used the word Black in its title, because there was so much talk about diversity. And I would come to Board of Education meetings and I would say, can someone explain to me what diversity means? I really don't understand the term, because to me it's coded language. It's coded language to hide behind because you don't want to deal with the specifics of race and class. And so we made a, you know, strategic decision that we were going to be the Black Parents Workshop. Now, quite honestly, through the years, it was a nasty fight. Like it got very nasty. Like I wouldn't even read social media sometimes, because some of the comments about me, about my family, even about my daughter, when we first started with my daughter as an 8th grade student, the comments were so nasty towards my daughter. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, hey, she's like an 8th grader, and this is what you're going to post on social media? And so I think the reality is that change is never easy. And most times change is very ugly. I'm in the middle of completing the draft for a manuscript on a book about this experience. And through the writing, I forgot about how nasty this fight really was, because I went back and I looked at comments in newspaper articles and in social media, and I'm like, oh my, like this was as ugly as something that you would think about in the 1950s in the South. And so I tell everyone that this fight is not for the faint of heart. Like, you really have to be committed to these issues, because you will sacrifice personally around this stuff and you will become a pariah. And so, you know, I think part of the lesson here is that when you look at the history of social movements, they're very narrowly constructed. Even though we have this nostalgic view of the civil rights movement and hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, if you talk to the people who were really involved, like a John Lewis or a Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was a friend of mine, like when you talk to them about there were very few people in that room planning. Like it wasn't throngs of people. And so the best thing you can do is get a small core committed group of folks who are going to be your ride or die advocates, who are always going to be there for you. Because if you have that, you don't need hundreds. In fact, sometimes the more people you invite to the party, the messier the party is going to be. And you don't want to dilute your agenda because you're trying to appease 300 people. Be firm in what you believe in and fight for it.
Let me just say something about the community aspect that you were talking about. We filed our lawsuit in 2018. Shortly after we filed our lawsuit, a group called for one of a better name, the Latino Action Network, which included several umbrella groups across the state of New Jersey, filed a major lawsuit in the state of New Jersey, accusing the state of having widespread discrimination in its schools, basically using the same statute that we were using as well. That lawsuit right now is stalled. It hasn't gone anywhere. And basically the reason it is stalled is because we employed strategic community advocacy. In my mind, these types of efforts have to be bottom up instead of top down. They were top down. They were aimed at going to the commissioner of the Department of Education and working against it with working to try to secure something in that direction. The problem is that was incredibly political. You had a governor that, of course, in an election year is not really moving toward any type of solution with that. But through the work of the Black Parents Workshop, and as he said before, Walter said before, attending meetings, showing themselves up at different places, our advocates writing letters and making sure that we were there, we became the go-to place for problems with schools. And when you do that, you cement and solidify yourself as the community advocate. And people tend to trust you. And in that regard, you have that credibility to move forward.
And the thing about the lawsuit that Robert just mentioned, Latino Action Network lawsuit, that's being led by a retired and highly respected New Jersey Supreme Court Justice, Gary Stein. And I've known Justice Stein for years. And one of the challenges that they have in New Jersey is really unlike a lot of states. New Jersey has law on the books. In New Jersey, the Commissioner of Education, due to a state Supreme Court ruling, has the power outright, without question, to integrate any school district in New Jersey. All the commissioner has to do is say, your school district is segregated, you have to integrate it. And that happened with the Morristown School District. It was merged with Morris Hills, and now it's the Morristown School District. And so it's not like there's not law on our side in New Jersey. What we really hadn't done in years before was all the organizing that is necessary to create the synergy around change. And so the organizing piece becomes key, because once you organize and once you have the ability to rapidly respond to issues, you become a different player in this game. And the Black Parents Workshop, through a lot of work, was able to become this rapid response team. And we didn't just always represent Black students. One of our plaintiffs was a white special needs student because we realized that special needs students were getting a sorry education in our school district. And I think we threw the district for a loop when we included this student as a plaintiff, because they were like, wait a minute, you're the Black Parents Workshop. We were like, yeah, but this child is actually being treated like a Black student because of the inferior education they're receiving. So it was one of these nice little curveballs that we were able to throw at the school district, because our complaint from day one had been, if you're not providing Black children a quality education, then you're probably not providing all children a quality education. So what's happening now? Because of our legal action, a group of parents came together after COVID-19, and they were frustrated with the fact that our virtual learning module for the school district was really a disaster. They hired a major law firm and threatened to sue the school district. I don't think they would have done that had they not saw what we did and the foundation we laid to hold the school district accountable.
Amazing story. We're going to go back to Erica. Go ahead, Erica. Let's give you a try again.
Let's see if it works this time. Can you hear me better?
Yes, and you look great.
Thank you. My question is with regard to the conversation around like resources, right? Because one of the things that comes up in like the work in the reading that I do with regard to equity is that the money isn't distributed quite equally from district to district. You know, if property values are what fund schools, then like in Black and brown communities have systematically kind of just been undervalued because racism, right? It creates a system where the funding follows the racism, and it essentially rewards racists for being racist. I'm wondering if that kind of conversation around funding and finances ever entered a broader conversation in the research that you did for your lawsuit with regard to the funding. I realize that that's more of a conversation of the federal level, not necessarily the local one, but yet and still, if any aspect of that came up in what you were discussing and over the years in your research, and if you have any insight into what that looks like.
Well, it actually isn't a federal issue because the federal government funds little of public education. It's mostly compensatory education under Title I. It's usually a state issue. And in New Jersey, we have one of the longest running school finance cases in the history of this country, Abbott versus Burke. So going back to the late 1970s, a series of lawsuits were filed in New Jersey to equalize school funding between school districts. And so we have what were once called Abbott districts, which were the 30th highest need school districts that received extra funds because they were underfunded compared to neighboring white middle class school districts. Connecticut has a similar case, Sheff versus O'Neill. If you look across the country, there are a number of states that have had these school finance cases. You know, the problem is always going to be if education is funded primarily off of property taxes, real estate taxes, you're always going to have these inequities. I moved to Maryland in December, and in Maryland, school districts are organized by county. So there's a little more equilibrium in Maryland, but we still have inequities. So I think the problem becomes if you can move funding public education off of property taxes. In New Jersey, we had a governor, Jim Florio, who tried to do that. He tried to use our state sales tax as a way to fund public education, and he was slaughtered for doing so. And it was only going to be a 2-cent increase in sales taxes, and people lost their minds. So I think the idea of it's not just how you fund it, it's how districts are configured. So if you have districts configured in such a way that they are tied to a zip code or zip codes, that you can see the disparities in wealth, then some school districts are always going to be less resourced. And so I think the idea becomes the structure of your public school district. The lawsuit that Robert mentioned, the Latino Action Network lawsuit, one of the strategic errors I think they made was they should have been pushing for the creation of countywide school districts in New Jersey. We have way too many school districts. When you have 600 school districts, you have 600 school district superintendents. Then you have 600 individual staffs of school districts. It's a lot of duplication that increases costs. So I think when you start looking at costs, you have to look at how your school districts are structured to be able to do it in such a way that it doesn't matter what zip code a child is in, they're getting an excellent education.
There was a suit that was filed, I believe, many years ago in New York, the campaign for financial equity.
Yes.
For fiscal equity, yeah.
Fiscal equity, yeah. And there was supposed to be a formula that came out of that. And as I understand it, there was so much resistance, and is still so much resistance. But right now, there's a tally that is owed of something like $850 million that should have been paid by the state.
It's actually $5 billion.
5 billion. Wow.
Yeah, billion with a B.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Again, you know, you don't want to get to the point of having to litigate, but so many of these things really have to. It calls for active and strategic litigation, that someone has to get on the ball and has to file actions to make these people responsive. I mean, in many ways, that's the only way that you can get these things moving.
And if you ever want to talk to someone who's an expert on school finance, I would suggest you reach out to my former NYU professor, Bob Byrne, who was very involved in that New York situation. Because I think, you know, it's egregious when you look at how much money should have been allocated versus the level of resources that you currently have today in 2020. And then you can just sort of back map and to show the resource differential and what some school districts are getting. And we're seeing it now throughout the country where you have school districts that don't even have Wi-Fi or laptops for children because they just simply can't afford it.
Yeah. Next up is Ayo. Go ahead. Ayo, are you there?
Yeah, I'm
Go
here.
ahead.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So this is very interesting conversation. I see a few people that I know. Hello, all of you. So the Campaign for Fiscal Equity was actually filed in 1993 when I headed the United Parents Associations, which at the time represented 200,000 parents of children in the public school system. And, you know, the money never came to New York, and there's still resistance against it coming to New York. And part of it has to do with what, you know, these two gentlemen have just finished discussing. There's nobody on target. There's nobody there's no organization or a group of lawyers that are laser focused on holding the state's feet to the fire. And so I'm glad to see that there was a situation in New Jersey where that did not happen. And I do think for those of you who may be considering a similar lawsuit in New York City or New York State, that incorporating the failure of the state to comply with the mandate of that lawsuit is something that can be added. So keep that in mind. I also just want to say congratulations on this win. I mean, it's fantastic. You know, it is like, you know, it would be like finding out that the DNA from the African burial ground, that you are a descendant of one of the remains that were, you know, research was done on. It's that important to the Black community. So I love the fact that you're males. I want to say, in addition to needing to have that family support with regard to income, that one of the failures of parents, particularly Black parents, wanting to get involved or wanting to stay involved does have to do with being targeted. I would say that 5 days after I called the vice president of the then Board of Education a racist for comments that she made about African-American children, she sued me for $5 million. I was terrified, about to quit, until somebody schooled me and explained that that provided a platform for me and, you know, got all kinds of exposure, so on and so forth. But it is important to have someone who can focus on your child's education while you're doing that other thing. And the question that I want to ask, and I would absolutely support in every way, any such lawsuit. And I think even the previous lawyers for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity and some of their staff who contacted me in recent years would be very interested in pitching in, at least to give some education about the lawsuit that happened already. Is I want to ask a question, and that is, did the law, was it a law or was it a policy that was in, that you said that you were using to hold the school district accountable for with regard to segregation? And if it was a law, if it was a law, it would have been a state law. If it was a policy, it could have just been a district policy, right?
It was the New Jersey State Constitution.
Oh.
Our Constitution is specific, the only one in the country that says that you cannot segregate in education. And it doesn't matter whether it's intentional or unintentional, segregation is unlawful in New Jersey.
Got it. All right. But your lawsuit was just about one school district, one step at a
Yes.
time.
It was
Okay.
one school district.
So just one last thing. I'm so excited to hear all of this because, Campaign for Fiscal Equity was 17 years ago,
Mhm.
and my child is long graduated and out of school, and the discussions about segregation, integration, equity in New York City schools is the same as it was way back then, even worse now. But I would ask everybody to consider the following in terms of language. And that is, I don't consider discussion about racism, equity, and integration to be difficult or complex. When we put that out there, it gives everybody a pass. And I would ask that you consider that in your language and not give people a pass on something that we have a right to discuss. We should be discussing. We can discuss it with or without people who are like-minded. But let's not set a negative tone by giving people a pass to say it's difficult. No, it's not. We deserve as much money as the school that's, 6 blocks away. It's not difficult thank you. It's just not difficult. It's either right or wrong. There may be a lot of complexities to how do we go about it, so on and so forth. But that's all I have to say. I'm just like super, super excited. And if I can in any way support this, I'm definitely down.
Let me just respond to one thing you said, because I think it's really important. You talked about us being out there and letting people know about what we're doing. These things, it is important that people understand that we're moving forward in these areas. One of the things that Walter can tell you about, we've witnessed, is that already in the state of New Jersey, individuals in school districts have contacted us about their own problems. Not only that, we have found that the school districts themselves have voluntarily reached out to organizations in order to make some changes in light of the lawsuit that we filed and in light of the settlement that we agreed on. They've already seen the handwriting on the wall. And so to that extent, it is critically important, number one, as you said, that you continue to discuss these issues, that you continue to put these issues in the forefront, and that you discuss them in direct terms regarding race and equity, and that everyone know that there is the possibility of resolving these things. So many times, individuals don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to even begin to resolve these school issues. And that's what we talked about, really putting our finger on and making sure that people get a chance to understand that there are alternatives, there are issues to be resolved here, and there are ways to resolve.
And I'd just like to add, I remember well your fight with the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, because I was on the staff of the Community Service Society of New York at the time.
Oh, yes.
And so when I saw your name pop up, I had a grin on my face, because I remember when that situation took off. And I think for me, it was a valuable lesson in how, unless you have this sort of concerted, focused effort. And around that time, I remember being in a meeting with Governor Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, talking about this issue. And I could see on his face a bit of relief, because I think he really understood, well, of course he did, he's a governor, politics, and whether or not this issue could outlast him, right? And so I think every politician gauges whether or not you have the ability to outlast them politically.
The staying power.
Yes, the staying power. And I think that's so important for people to understand. And, our state constitution is a fluke. The only reason why that provision is in the New Jersey state constitution, because in 1947, the only Black delegate to our state constitutional convention, a Black Republican, who was actually the first Black person admitted to the New Jersey bar, Oliver Randolph, He insisted on the convention floor that they put that provision in it, and he would not relent. And they finally agreed to that provision. Because when you look at other state constitutions, there's nothing even closely resembling the language in the New Jersey Constitution. We have a powerful tool to use. Most states don't. And so I think in places like New York and Connecticut, it becomes real tough because at some point you have to base your claim on law. And if you don't have strong state law, it can be very challenging. So I think part of it is the concerted effort. Part of it is what type of law do you have, case law, to operate with? And then whether or not you have the staying power. And if you can convince people that long after you're gone, we're going to still be here. And I think when they get that message, you get some attitude adjustments.
Absolutely.
Next up is Naomi. Go ahead, Naomi.
Hi. I wanted to sort of talk about the other form of, you mentioned, Walter, when you moved in, it was sort of the Black families who were middle, upper class going into a neighborhood that was white, and convincing them that this was a thing. What I am finding in my little tiny district is that, Black and brown families, especially in New York City, have a lot of trauma around being in white spaces, myself included, right? I'm a proud product of public housing, and I don't like being in predominantly white spaces. So when there was an opportunity to merge two school communities, and the language and the outreach that the Department of Education did was incredibly problematic. It was not centered on the families that would be mostly impacted. It was a complete disaster. And what ended up happening is that this predominantly Black and brown community was like, we don't want white people in our spaces, because when they move in, they take it over. And that's sort of what happens in the city, right? Your neighborhood is crap, and then white people start moving in, and then it's gentrified. Then you're living out of you can't live in your neighborhood. You gotta go somewhere else. So that's what, and the argument was, we don't need white people to make our school better, which absolutely true. But what the challenge was just trying to articulate to these families is that this is not about needing white people to make it better. It's about creating a classroom where you're comfortable being surrounded with people who don't look like you. So when you're an adult, you don't have to have those uncomfortable, those issues, right? So wanted your feedback on a little bit of that. Like, when you were talking to your families, like, what was it that you think got them on the hook of wanting to do this work?
Well, I think a couple of things. Most Black families that moved to South Orange or Maplewood moved there from urban spaces, whether it was Brooklyn or Jersey City, New Jersey, or Hoboken, because they wanted what they perceived to be a quality education in a low crime community with certain aesthetics. So it's a mostly single family home community. We have very few apartments. They're gorgeous old colonials, beautiful, beautiful towns. But I think for Black people, it wasn't a sense of we moved there because we felt as though we had to be next to white people or that our children had to be next to white people. It was the issue of resources that you can see in that community, which is right next to Newark, New Jersey, and Irvington, New Jersey. Where I lived in Maplewood is a 20-minute ride to the heart of Newark, New Jersey, one of the most urban spaces in America. So it wasn't trying to get away, it was just trying to find a place that we felt our children could get a quality education. I think the frustration is that when you move to a community like this, you make some assumptions. And we found that many of those assumptions are erroneous. You assume that because you make as much money as a white resident, and in fact, in South Orange, New Jersey, Black household income was always higher than white household income. And so there was an assumption that, we've arrived, we've made it, everything's going to be fine. But then when you start getting the horror stories back from your children about how they're treated, or when you begin to feel things in the community. We have a community pool in both towns. And when I first moved to Maplewood and I would take my daughter to the pool, it was pretty obvious that, oh, we're not really wanted here, because you could tell by the looks on people's faces that it was like, oh, like, what are they doing here? So I think the challenge for people of color is that integration is always pursued on the basis of white comfort. Like, let's make white people comfortable and then we'll integrate the space. And I think what we've tried to do is flip that, to say that our children are just as valuable as white children. And we want to make sure that they have an environment in which they can be educated bias-free, and that they don't have to feel like they're walking into a hostile building or a hostile classroom simply to get an education. And that's hard for a lot of white people to hear, because the assumption is that this world was designed for us. And when you start shaking that tree, of course there's going to be a resentment. But the most beautiful thing that happened after this illegal agreement is how many white residents reached out to us and said, thank you. Like, we appreciate what you did. Because what I've also discovered is that there are a lot of white progressive residents who did not want to speak up for fear of being ostracized. And so they were so appreciative that a Black organization stepped up and did this, because now it's given them the freedom to talk to their neighbors and say, this should have been done a long time ago. Like, if we're really going to be the community we say we're going to be, then what the Black Parents Workshop did was absolutely necessary. So we're getting emails now from white residents who are saying, look, I'm not Black, I don't have Black children, but you know what, I want to be an ally. And so please sign me up. And I think that is amazing, because as we said from the get-go, is that either we're all going to get to the same place around equity, or we're always going to be divided. At some point, we all have to realize that we're all in the same boat. And so for white parents, I tell them, your child is going to walk into a world that's fundamentally different than the one you grew up in. Do you want them walking into the world not understanding different cultures, not appreciating different cultures? Like, do this for the sake of your own child's future, because there's going to be a day when you're not there. And as someone who attended a historically Black college as an undergraduate, but went to a racially integrated public school district, I've seen both sides of the spectrum. And I tell people all the time, both sides are beautiful. Both sides together are even more beautiful. And so if we can get to that point and understand that it's going to be a little uncomfortable for everybody, and that's okay. But if we work at it, we'll find it, we'll come to a day where everybody is comfortable and every child is getting a quality education, and parents don't have to fear about what's going on between 8:30 in the morning and 3 o'clock in a school building.
Next question is from Marilyn. Go ahead, Marilyn.
I'm going to switch up, and I have many different things that I wanted to say. I did have a particular question, but I just wanted to first say congratulations. I am a relatively recent immigrant to Maplewood from Brooklyn. And I actually, Eddie Fergus worked for me at Metis Associates many years ago. And so I've been tracking on the SOMA situation since I got here. I also have devoted my entire professional career to school integration. And I've worked with school districts from East Coast to West Coast, rural South Carolina, Midwest. So I'm very, very passionate about school integration and issues of educational equity. And I just want to say that I would love to be of service in the continuation. I'll put my contact information in here. I do live in Maplewood. I've been working from home. My company has been doing work for school districts around the country. And in fact, I stalked Dr. Taylor, actually. I sat through those ridiculous board meetings month after month, ridiculous. Wrote to him multiple times because I think that the best solution for Boynton is to be a magnet school, which happens to be what I do for a living, is develop magnet school programs for school districts around the country, which are highly, highly effective in creating integrated educational environments. Never got a peep. So I'm now barking up your tree because I feel like I live here in Maplewood. I have a lot to offer. I am willing to work and volunteer and bring my expertise in this area. I think you guys did a fantastic job with this lawsuit. I was super excited to track on it and see the settlement. And I will put my contact information and anything that I can do. Also, my firm is a research firm, and we do a lot of work in this kind of compliance space. And so I know that the battle has in fact just begun in terms of holding the school district accountable. And I know that it is difficult to get data sharing agreements with school districts, but it's possible. And so, you know, a lot of what we do is to really look at those data and dice them and slice them in ways that tell the story, you know, that we want to tell. So I think that I can be of service, and I just want to offer myself up. And I'm
love to have you. And you know, folks have my email, and so make sure you get that from her and send me all your contact information. Look, I think the challenge here is that all of these are latent issues. Like after Brown versus Board of Education, I think the switch was turned off in America. And before you knew it, we started seeing resegregation all across the country, but in new and different ways. Like when I moved to South Orange and Maplewood, I couldn't believe when I walked through the high school and I could look in a classroom and realize that, oh, that must be an AP class because there are no Black students. Oh, this must be a remedial class because there's nothing but Black students. And I've described it to journalists as the segregation beyond the front door. So you see all the kids go through the same front door in the morning, but the second door they go through is a segregated door. And that's the door that the public is not seeing. And that's, I think, what this lawsuit allowed people to finally understand, that yes, we have a facially integrated school district. You drive past the schools in the morning and you see all the children playing and they're all running through the same front door. But once they get past that front door, there are all these devices within those schools that are segregating our kids. And that's what we have to get to. So we'd love to talk to you.
I mean, because the other thing is that from my vantage point, having worked with school districts around the country, there's a very two-dimensional approach. It's AP or not. It's gifted or not. But, you know, the education right now has evolved to the point where there is so much more opportunity to engage all sorts of students. And I think that, you know, unfortunately, unless you're the work that you did to take people to Rockville, we did a huge equity audit for Montgomery County Public Schools, by the way, which I can also.
Jack Smith.
And it was very revelatory. And as a result of our recommendations, they completely revamped their gifted and talented identification process. So, you know, it's great to see what other folks are doing, but, you know, you have to have those brave conversations, and you have to be willing to kind of tackle, you know, and I don't know what the average tenure here of teachers in the Soma School District, but, you know, pretty soon those folks are going to be retiring, and hopefully we'll get, you know, a new wave of more energetic, innovative teachers, and we'll be able to kind of move things. But, you know, it's not just AP or not, or gifted or not, you know, that's not the paradigm anymore.
Oh, not at all. And I used to always use New York City as an example to say that we live in the shadow of New York City, but we don't expose our students to New York City, right? So you have all these great cultural institutions in New York City that children in Maplewood through the public school district never get a chance to access. And so I think COVID-19 has given everyone a chance to be creative and innovative. Like, let's use this crisis to say we need to be reimagining public education, because clearly the normal wasn't really great for a lot of children, right? And so it's not even an issue of returning to the normal. And so we have this opportunity in front of us. Let's create something new and exciting.
I have a question from my colleague who couldn't stay on because his dinner got served. So we have, New York City Department of Education makes a lot of data available. We even have a portal on the New York City website, but some really critical data are not available, like suspension rates broken down by race and gender, right? Those problematic data sets that they don't want us to see, they hide behind in their database. How were you able to get data that you needed for your work? Did you have to use FOIL?
We have a version of FOIL in New Jersey, Open Public Records Act, OPRA. So that's a tool that we use. But we also had the benefit of the U.S. Department of Education in Washington had come in and basically did a data grab of the district. Like there was just a ton of data on the South Orange Maplewood School District because it was under federal investigation.
Oh.
And then when the ACLU filed their complaint, they also accessed a lot of data through public records access requests. I think in New York City, you may have to FOIL that suspension data. And if they don't provide it, then I think you may have to go into a courtroom to seek an order to get it. Because if you don't have that, you're really shooting in the dark. You know, you really want to know what the landscape looks like by race and gender. Because I'll give you an example. Most people think that Black boys have the most difficult time in schools in terms of suspensions and expulsions. That wasn't the case in South Orange and Maplewood. It was Black girls. Black girls were suspended almost 12 times the rate as white girls in our school district. And when the ACLU showed me the data, I fell off my chair. I was like, I can't believe this. And I think you should also reach out to an organization like the ACLU, because I think they can be very helpful. Part of their national mandate has been around these issues of equity. And in certain states, they've been very aggressive in helping organizations, particularly when it comes to acquiring the data that's needed to see what's really going on in a school district.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll keep
You know,
trying.
real quick, I'm sorry. Just in case you can't see it, Sarah and Ma have questions.
Yes, I know.
And they said they
Yep.
can't raise their hand. Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yes,
Good.
I see. Yeah. Yes, FOIL is a problem in New York City because they'll just, anyway, I'm going to go to the next questioner, who's Sharmali. Go ahead, Sharmali.
Hi. So I just want to know, because I'm following up on Naomi's comment that and it's the same thing in my district where parents don't necessarily want integration because of that fear of takeover of their cultural school, which has served them for so many years. And really, they just want resources for the schools. But in your work or in your experience in organizing, how does any kind of charter school system or also gifted and talented kind of apologies, a gifted and talented, any kind of screening practices affect your some of the outcomes in your district as well, and how did you handle that?
Well, we don't have any charter schools in our school district. In New Jersey, there is a school choice law that very few people actually utilize that allows students to go to other school districts. I think for us, the focus was on the policies of the Board of Education. So when we started looking at access to classes, it was clear that they had put in place a number of screens in order to siphon off Black students from these classes. So whether it was you needed permission from a teacher, or you needed permission from a guidance counselor, or you had to pass a test and hit a certain mark in order to be able to access an advanced level or an advanced placement course, we were able to eliminate all that screening mechanism to the point that now it is up to the student. If the student says, I want to take Calculus 2, the student can take Calculus 2. Student doesn't have to get permission from anyone, including his parents. Because we said, after talking to the college board, a conversation that I had with the college board, they were mortified that our school district had put in place all of these prerequisites in order to take advanced placement courses. And so we were able to even use the college board against the school district to say the very body that administers these classes and tests say our district is doing it the wrong way. So, you know, part of it is you have to really know the policies that are in place in your district. And in terms of the integration piece, I don't think it's anything to fear. I think you just have to be organized and you have to be clear in what your expectations are of the school district to make sure that your child is going to receive a quality education no matter who he or she is sitting next to. And I think it's key to have an organization because that's the only way we were able to achieve. Look, plenty of people had talked about this issue in South Orange and Maplewood for going on 30 years. And it wasn't until we organized that we actually saw changes.
Sarah, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sarah Medina Camasholi. I am a former public school teacher in District 7 of the South Bronx and community organizer. I organize mostly youth around intersectional platforms on integration. And I'm finishing up law school right now and studying movement lawyering. And what I'm most interested in is practices that lawyers do to really include community. And I just, you know, I was really moved by what you shared about how the settlement reflected your initial demands and how unique that is. And so I was wondering if you could share with the group here, what were some key practices or ways of being that the folks who were, the attorneys who were working on legal strategy used to make sure community voice was front and center? And were there times when attorneys had to be changed or moved to make sure that community voice was the priority and not the priority of the ACLU or whatever firm was working with you? And thank you for your work.
Thank you. Well, I will tell you, Robert Tarver, who I've known for 30 years, the reason why I asked him to be our legal counsel was because I understood that he had a strong grounding in community activism. And so the notion of filing this lawsuit started from the perspective of it being rooted in the community, rooted in the concerns of the community. And I think, and he can talk more about his conversations with the school district councils, but I think it became very aware to the school district lawyers that we were so anchored in that there was no place for them to run. And, you know, I think it's important also to get lawyers who you can trust. There was never a time where I didn't feel as though I could talk to Robert about issues and be very frank and honest. And there was never a time that I didn't trust his judgment in how we were going to proceed with this litigation. But you have to have lawyers that you trust. And I would say that, you know, we were lucky because he's not a 300-person firm. I'm quite sure he wishes he had 299 other lawyers sometimes to pass work to. But there's something about smallness that works in these situations because you don't get lost in all the bureaucracy of a law firm. And so find a lawyer or two that can really focus, and I think that you'll find success. Rob, I don't know if you want to.
In terms of community strategy, you know, one of the most disheartening things here, and I was the only attorney involved in this, one of the most disheartening things in this was I made significant attempts to try to bring several parties on board. I went to at least one of the legal clinics of one of the law school in order to try to get them involved and see if they wanted to be a part of this. They basically never got back to me. And when it comes to community organizations and trying to bring them on board with the suit, I'd be very careful because in many of these cases, particularly cases that are race-based, whether school cases or others, as Walter said earlier, there is a hesitancy in many parts of the community to get involved. Now, when we started this lawsuit, we were branded as outliers, rebels, rabble-rousers, and everything else. The general consensus of the community was that this was a frivolous lawsuit. It was going nowhere. I think some of those sentiments even came from members of the board and other areas. There was a community coalition in and around South Orange and Maplewood that basically never stepped up to try to give us any aid. In fact, none of the community organizations gave us any real aid, and we sought aid from all of them. So I got to tell you, that was really very disturbing on our part, very concerning. But be that as it may, I think part of the reasons we were successful is exactly what we talked about before, that the Black Parents Workshop was able to create within the community, you know, a Superman effect, that every time you get in trouble, you know, you better call Superman. And the Black Parents Workshop basically solidified itself as Superman. They were the go-to organization. And because that was the case, we did have support, albeit it was mostly covert and closet support. Very few people wanted to come out and be very open and say, we support this organization. But it's funny, it's like that what was that old fable of the red hen, who's gonna help me do this and this, and then when you get to the end of it and you're successful, everyone had a part of it. You know, you got a lot of people now saying that they supported this whole effort, but it's all revisionist history, because we were all alone in dealing with this for the longest period of time. But we knew what we were doing, we knew where we were going, and we knew that it was for the community. And one of the things Walter was talking about, getting yourself a good attorney, it's a problem, because you'll find very few attorneys who want to get out there and are willing, and not just willing, sometimes able to do this kind of work without having some sort of significant retainer or some sort of significant continuous pay source. We didn't have that, we didn't do that. You know, this was a labor of love for both of us and other members of the organization. We decided we wanted to see this thing through. And look, you're going to law school now, you say, I'm from the Charles Hamilton Houston School, a lawyer who is not a social engineer, is a parasite on society. You've got to find lawyers who have that same mindset and are willing to really step up and fill the gap in these types of efforts. And you know, we were just fortunate to be able to be of the same mindset, Walter and I, to see this thing through.
Sarah, I'm counting on you. Do you have time for one more question? Is that okay? I know it's 7:26.
Oh, yes, yes.
Great,
absolutely.
thank you. Mar, go ahead, it's your turn.
Hi, actually 3 little ones. My first question is, I understand it was a labor of love, but lawsuits can't run completely on love. So where did the money come from to do everything that you guys achieved? My second one was, what was the legal organizational structure of the plaintiff, the Black student, what was it called? The Black Families Student
Black Parents Workshop.
Parents Workshop, yeah.
Black Parents Workshop. What was the structure of that? And the third was like Shino's question, data has been really hard to get. And frankly, Dr. Fergus, who is supposed to be doing this for our district anyway, maybe for the whole city, has not really been that helpful. So those are my 3 quick ones.
Well, on the first question, there was no money. Mr. Tarver did it voluntarily. I volunteered all of my time. And so there was never any money involved. In fact, one of the claims that people in the community were making was that we were trying to milk the school district. And we kept telling people, just read the lawsuit. We asked for not a penny for the Black Parents Workshop. Everything that was in this lawsuit was for students. And so it was never about compensation, and we didn't get compensated, and we're both broke, but we're happy. The second issue in terms of the structure of our organization, so we have a board of trustees. We're a not-for-profit organization. We also have a board of advisors. We have a chairman. I was formerly the chairman. I resigned when I decided to relocate to Maryland, but I stayed the chairman of our policy and legal committee, and now I sit on our board of advisors. And so we have a structured organization. And then the third question in terms of data, that's the key. And so I think there has to be some strategizing around how to get that data. And here's one suggestion. If you can find a willing journalist who has a heart for this work, let that journalist go after the data. Like if you can find someone from the New York Times, it becomes very difficult for city government or the school board to hide data from a paper like the New York Times. Because if you can find an ally like that, you'll have a better chance of getting the data. And then the second strategy is to just make noise, like embarrass the school district. Like, what are they hiding? Why won't they give you the data? If they won't give it to you, it must be really bad. Like, shame them into giving you the data. And I will tell you, I spent a lot of time shaming the South Orange Maplewood School District. You know, I would go to board meetings and shame them. I would be the most uncooperative person at a board meeting because I felt that the only way that we were ever going to resolve this issue is that we had to embarrass some people and put them on notice. And, you know, I'm used to doing that. I've been an activist all my life, since my teenage years. A lot of people aren't comfortable playing that role. Like, a lot of people aren't comfortable after the first time you see a nasty comment on social media about you. A lot of people will fold the tent. It just kind of emboldened me because I figured if folks are going to get this nasty about the education of children, we must be doing something right. Like, how can you be angry at a group that wants to make sure children get an education? And I found it kind of comical that people were calling me all these names and accusing me of these horrible things. Like, wow, like, over kids? Like, I'd hate to see what you say about some other stuff because, you know, these are children we're talking about. So look, hang in there. Like, and we're here to help you now. Like, and I've been telling everybody this, like, we want to help. We didn't do this just for South Orange and Maplewood. We did this because we knew if we were successful, we could create a template that could be used across the country. So we are telling everybody, if you want to do this, invite us in. We will show you everything we did. We will help. We will advise. We will support. We will help organize. We will do whatever is necessary. And I say we, I'm dragging my friend Mr. Tarver into this conversation because he knows. Look, we, aside from this lawsuit, we had to represent individual students at times. We had a bad incident in our community around our local police that we had to go after the police, and we got a settlement for a Black student who was assaulted by our police officers. So we've put ourselves on the line because we are both Black fathers, right? We have children, and we understand what it's like to be a parent and to see and feel that your child has been cheated. And so I really want to thank you guys for even inviting us tonight, because as much as you congratulated us, I really want to congratulate all of you, because when I got the email, I was excited because it really showed me, like, we're not alone out here. Like, there are other people who are feeling the same thing we felt 8 years, because sometimes when you're out there in this battle, you really feel lonely. It's like, are we the only people who really give a damn about this stuff? So when we started getting emails from folks, we were like, wow, like, yeah, there's people out there who understand what we've been saying. So you got a partner in us.
And we have this recorded, so now you can't get out of it.
Can't get out of it.
I do want to be mindful of time. It's Friday evening, it's 7:32. So I know we have a lot more questions, but let's just say this is the beginning of a long conversation and hopefully a partnership. We have a lot of advocates on our side of the river, and we would love to work with you and ask you for your wisdom and guidance. So we promise to be in touch, but
Please
we'll
do.
promise not to overwhelm you because we do have 1.1 million students in the system. So
Well, look, you have my email address. Please make it
Yes.
available to everybody. So if you have
I
any
will.
follow-up questions, just send them to me and I'll do my best to answer them.
Great. And everybody else, I will be sharing Walter's contact via email. And thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Walter and Robert. Really,
Thank
really
you.
incredible.
Have a great
will be
weekend,
in
everybody, and
You
stay safe
too.
out
Take
there.
care.